So today I'm going to be taking a look at my second model from the brand Tuseno. Just like last time, this watch was actually sent into review by the brand itself. They didn't have any oversight in what I said, and they didn't have to review the video in any way, so all the thoughts are my own, but thank you to the brand for letting me have hands-on with this watch. It was nice. And yeah, if you want to see the other video, I'll have it linked down below, but let's take a look at this one. So here we have the green and the orange dial. I'm going to kind of switch between the two throughout the video. Both beautiful, vibrant colors. I do think the orange kind of pops a little bit more, but the green does have a beautiful color depth as well. So really no wrong option, but if you really want to pop, orange is kind of the way to go. We have a diameter of 38.9, lug to lug of 46.9, height of only 10.6, and a lug width of 20 millimeters. Some other specifications, we're going to have the Sellita SW200-1 movement beating away in there. Pretty much completely unfinished, nothing special going on there, but still a decent movement. We have 100 meters of stated water resistance with a screw down crown, which is nice to see. We have a flat sapphire crystal on top with an inner AR coating, sapphire crystal on the back as well. There's BGW9 used for all the lume on the hands and the indices, full stainless steel case, and lastly the watch retails directly from Tuseno for $649. So starting off with the dial of this watch, and really I think with both of these models, they did a really good job on both the color and just the beauty of the pattern and the way it interacts with the color and the texture and the depth. You can see we have these kind of bowed lines that radiate out from the center. And apparently this dial is inspired by vintage yachts and the way that their decks were made out of teak and the kind of pattern that the decks had. So to me, it looks pretty cool. It gives kind of a different flair than the, Aqua Terra, which goes for a similar type of theme. It is very deep, which I like. The grooves are actually almost cut into the dial in a very interesting way that you can very much easily see the depth that the lines create into the dial itself. So it's something that it's not just surface level, it's a little bit more three-dimensional than you would expect, and it comes together and looks really nice on the dial. Something we also see here is a very subtle sunburst pattern also built into the dial. You have this very vibrant undertone under color, and then a sunburst laid on top of that. Typically, I'm not the biggest fan of sunburst dials. I kind of prefer one simple tone, kind of almost lacquer type look. But here, I like it. It is very subtle. It only really gets aggressive in super direct sunlight, and even then it doesn't look too bad. But you can kind of tell here in this more subtle shaded light, it's a super gentle sunburst where you just get these very gentle bow tie effects that come out here and there and really just add to the color depth of the watch without distracting or looking cheap or really taking away from any of the beauty of the dial itself. I mentioned it very slightly previously, but of course we have this very beautiful deep orange dial. It's not one of those dials that's like weirdly carrot orange. It has a little bit more saturation to it. It has a little bit more depth, a little bit more beauty in my opinion. I'm not a huge fan of the color of orange, but they did it really nicely here. And similarly with the green, even though this is maybe a little bit more of a traditional dark foresty color, there is still a little bit of that really bright light tone in there that you don't typically see from watches. So it is nice, and it is I think not only a classy type of dark green tone, but it still just has a little bit of that fun flair to it. The orange is it's insane. It's a little bit much, but that is for some people, and arguably I actually like the orange more here. It's just more fun, it's more playful, it gives it that more summery feel, and sometimes that's just what you're going for. Taking a look at some of the more general details, we have trapezoidal markers all around, a little bit of a half marker at 6 o'clock with a circular date window. I do find that kind of odd. I almost would have preferred a maybe trapezoidal date to kind of just fit in with the markers, maybe blend in slightly more. But that circular date window does kind of almost tie into that circular bowie effect from that teak dial. So it's a give and take. I don't hate it. I don't mind it. It has a pretty nice shape to it. It's bifaceted even down to the counterbalance on the seconds hand. So I really can't complain. The lumen fill is done nicely. It looks very uniform. The markers themselves actually have depth and kind of a multifaceted look about them. They catch the light really nicely and play with it. There is just, I think, a lot of premium touches to this dial. Again, the brushing sunburst pattern, the actual depth of the texture itself. There actually is on the outboard of this seconds track a little bit of like a more grained texture, which we can see more once we zoom in. So I think Tuseno did a really good job of just creating something that looks a little bit more unique, has beautiful depth to it, and is something where the closer you look, the more you really find.
So taking a look at the dial here, and we can see in natural light the color pops out a lot more, and you see that sunburst becomes a little bit more aggressive. It's still not too blatant in your face, and there's still a lot of color saturation, but it's there. At off angles, it goes away, becomes a little bit more uniform, but it pops out in the sun. I don't think it's blatant and like egregious in any way, but it's there. Looking at the bracelet though, even in direct sunlight, it has this beautiful play to it. When we go to the shade though, the color becomes much more uniform. The sunburst, while still there, is much more subtle. It's a very gentle bow tie effect that really just adds a nice pop of color gradation, really. And going on to the green one, we can see that similar thing. The green to me is a lot darker in kind of the shade. It takes on this almost deep forest tone, and then sometimes that bow tie effect grabs some other colors, but either way, it's still a beautiful dial in the shade. The bracelet, because of the shade, you get just so much more depth out of it. It shines, it sparkles, it goes dark, it goes light. It just has a lot of play to it, which is beautiful. And then in direct sunlight for the green, you know, the color becomes a little bit less muted. It comes out a lot more, but it still is a relatively safe color, but still pretty.
So zooming in on the dial here, and just as a quick note, this is a prototype dial, so there might be some small little imperfections here and there, but even then, it still is pretty well done. You can see the printing is done fairly nicely, that nice bright white tone. You can see that subtle sunburst brushing effect that's on that base dial texture, and again, the actual very deep grooves for that bowie pattern. And I went for something I really haven't seen much before, and actually went with something etched into, engraved down into the dial, adding true depth. So it is nice to see that they went that extra step, that probably more expensive step, and to me it accomplishes its job very well. It looks nice. Zooming into, you can see what I mentioned with that seconds track being a little bit more of this pebbled, almost leatherette type, almost even maybe gravelly rock type look to it. Even the little seconds markers on that track have a nice three-dimensionality, a nice little almost tic-tac-like quality to them. You even have this somewhat hidden detail in this rehaut here, where typically you just see people going for full high polish, but they did this as a way to take the numerals off the dial up into the little area here where honestly at most angles you don't see it, but then as you move your kind of wrist around, as you look at it at an angle, that just kind of pops to life a little bit, and that actual extra little bit of brushing adds a lot of life to the dial that I like. Looking at the marker itself, you can see it's actually beautifully multifaceted. You have this very top portion that holds the lume and then holds the brushed top portion of the marker, and then the sides slope down on each side to give a little bit more of a high polish, a little bit of a glint, a little bit of a shimmer. So it is something where it's actually very complicated. It's not just a flat stick marker, it's not just a one polish and you're done. It is something with a little bit more detail, a little bit more attention, and I do think that comes to life on wrist. Switching over to the orange dial for a second. Again, same story here, beautiful little details, beautiful brushing. You can see here a little bit more dramatically that amount of color depth you get from the sunburst coming in and out. Such a lovely color on this orange one. Looking at the handset, of course we have a little bit of dirtiness there towards the base of the hand stack. Partially probably because this is a prototype, partially because it's kind of QC expected for this price range. But even still, the hands and the metal applied indices look pretty nice. Again, little specks here and there, but I'm going to chalk that up to this being a QC for a prototype model. The hands themselves, beautiful shape to them. The Lume inlay, super flat and done nicely. There, again, isn't much that I can say bad about this watch. I do like the design, I like the little details, and I think there is just a lot to like. So moving on to the case of this watch, I do think this is a place where Tuseno did a really good job. If you've seen my previous review on like the shellback model, I believe it's called, also very similar case, similar construction, similar fit and finish, and that is done very well. It fits well, it's just nicely done, nicely polished, nicely brushed. You can see it is mainly brushed for the most part, vertical brushing on the bezel, on the case, on the bracelet, but you have a lot of these break up points of polish where it just accents it beautifully and helps it shine a little bit more. Even if there were no polished elements, you see how much light play this bracelet has from just the brushing. It's done finely, it's done to a really high quality, and the surfaces themselves aren't just flat and one-dimensional. You have kind of an arch down on both sides of the link, you have an arch down on both sides of the outer link. There is just a lot of built-in geometry into the watch, which at first isn't apparent, but it does become once you wear it. And then each kind of little jut down portion is actually polished by contrast to the brushed portion. So again, that just adds more to the light play as you're moving it around, and those polished portions are popping out from the beautiful brushing, and it just is a nice watch to look at. The sides are completely high polish, which I think maybe they could have just gone for brushing there. I think the brushing is done better overall, and the high polish is more of a perfect accent, but take it for what you will. They do have this beautiful chamfer here, which actually thins out and disappears towards the middle of the case here, and then grows and grows and becomes largest towards the end of the lug here. Very beautiful detail. The crown itself is engraved with this Tuseno logo. The case back itself, pretty sterile, just a kind of classic sapphire case back with some text on the outboard. Again, the movement relatively unfinished. And then we do actually have quick release spring bars here, which I do find slightly odd because this is the first time I've come across this type of quick release spring bar, where the quick release spring bar itself is, double barrel on both sides, but it can actually fully come out. I've never seen that from a quick release spring bar before, at least on a metal bracelet. So just be a little bit more careful, I guess. If you take it off, it won't stay in there. So I don't know if that's something that's completely going to be on the full production model, but just keep that in mind. It is a little bit less stable than other applications of a quick release spring bar M-Link. Really quickly talking about the bezel here, they did go for a completely flat, almost perfectly flush to the crystal bezel that again is fully brushed, so it gives it this sportier, more tool watch look to it, and really just frames the dial nicely too. It doesn't distract and shine away from the dial, it just kind of frames it and lets the color pop, which I think is a good choice. And then you have this beautiful slope down on the edge, which is high polish, gives it a little bit of relief. And again, the polish accents are, as it kind of suggests, accenting the watch very nicely here. So moving on to how this watch wears, just keep in mind this is a 39 millimeter, and earlier I was wearing this Alexander Shorikoff, which is also 39 millimeters, but a little bit more of a dress watch, so see how that compares. So here we have the watch sitting on my 6.5-inch wrist, and I think you can tell it fits pretty proportionately. The lugs are fairly short, and it sits within the bounds of my wrist nicely. It doesn't sit up off the wrist too high. It is a relatively thin watch, which is nice, and the profile is very good for ergonomics on the wrist. The bracelet itself, and I didn't really mention it, it has pretty thin links, so they don't bulk up. It doesn't feel too heavy or too bulky or too sporty because of that. We do come to this butterfly bracelet here, butterfly clasp. Not my favorite, to be fair. I was able to get a pretty good fit with this butterfly clasp and this link style, but at the moment you do have only the one size of link throughout the entire bracelet. Tuseno said they are actually working on making a smaller kind of half link that will be available for purchase later, and will actually be, I believe, included on future models or like the Gen 2 of this watch. So that is nice that they're doing that, because of course there is no micro adjust on a butterfly clasp. But back to the wearing experience, it is just really nice on wrist. Again, slim, close to the wrist. That beautiful light play you get from the bracelet is just awesome. You do have just a very slight taper here in the bracelet. It goes from about 20 to 17.5 at the very clasp point here. But again, the light play you get from this bracelet is just awesome. This is one of the better bracelets I've seen at this sub $1,000 price point, and it really is just, it feels premium. It looks good. It's executed well. The brushing is done well. It just is, deserving of praise. And then popping the orange on, you can see, of course, a little less under the radar, a little bit louder. It almost maybe even seems a little bit bigger to some people just because the dial is a little bit brighter and a little more almost expansive in a way. But again, wears well, looks great. Thankfully, the beautiful brushing and finishing doesn't overpower the dial, which, it'd be hard to overpower this crazy orange, but, that's neither here nor there. You can see from the side view that watch does sit down into the wrist pretty perfectly. It doesn't rise up at all. There's not really any gap between the wrist itself and the watch, so it does just conform very nicely. They did a good job overall on the shape and the wearing experience and the proportions. So this is just a beautiful platform for a watch, and I like to see Tuseno building on it. Moving on to some other straps, and let's get the most outrageous, intense one out of the way to begin with. This is a beautiful orange silicone strap from Archer Straps. It, to me, matches the orange pretty perfectly. It takes the orange up to 20 out of 10. It just is intense. It's crazy, but it's colorful and it's fun. And, as someone who kind of hates orange, this is cool still. There we have it on the wrist. Again, I think when you have a strap that kind of matches this perfectly, it just feels right in a way. Looks good, super comfortable, plants the watch even better because that Silicone is a little bit thinner and it just helps it sit in one place nicely. If I move the watch up a little bit, I have closer to a 6-inch wrist here, and you can still see it fits pretty well. It's not too big, not too small by any means. It's just a really nicely proportioned watch. Moving on to the same kind of thing for the green watch, we have this very dark green Archer silicone strap. I think it pairs perfectly with this green dial. It's maybe not as perfect tone on tone as the orange one, but it does really play well off the darker tones that come out of the green. But I just think it complements it nicely. Again, plants it really nicely. With this one, I actually cut it off so I don't have any little extra strap hanging out. And I think it makes it feel a little bit more cohesive, a little bit more streamlined. It just feels more integrated that way. And yeah, just looks good on this strap. Really just makes it a little more stealthy in a sense, making it all one tone, all one color. I dig it, and yeah, a lot less loud of a combo than the orange. As a pretty fun, unique combo, we have this cork strap with collaboration of Theo and Harris and John Rousseau. I think it looks amazing, adds this kind of tan tone to the green, which it just plays well off of. The cork, I think, pairs kind of with that yachting theme. It just looks good and is an interesting strap as well. Cool combo, makes the color green pop a little bit more, especially compared to the last one where it was a little bit more monotone. Really fun strap, and I'd recommend getting one. It kind of matches with everything. Next, if you want to sport it up a little bit, we have this more canvas style strap from Monstraps. Adds a similar kind of tannish, grayish tone that the cork did, but just in a different, almost sportier way because this woven texture, and I think it looks good. Really just the adventurer watch, right? You go out this and map some oceans or something, I don't know, but it looks cool to me. And lastly, the classic white Archer silicone strap. I think it looks fantastic, pairs with the tones of the Lume perfectly. Of course, they went with that BGW9 signature, so of course it's gonna pair well. And yeah, makes the watch pop and just feel good. Really comfortable, gives it that nice kind of creamsicle type of look. Just a fun combo and a bright strap for a bright watch. And there we have the white silicone on the green as well. Again, just as good looking, just as good of a combination. And yeah, just this strap looks good on everything. Two good looking watches, both really pair well with the strap. Both have a kind of fun feel about them that's exemplified by the strap or taken to the next level by the strap. So yeah, I really dig it. So taking a look at the Lume here, and maybe this is just, maybe take it with a grain of salt. It'll probably be a little bit better in the production versions, but it's not fantastic. It glows decently well. The hands are a little bit less lumed than the rest of the indices, which is usually, I think, the opposite way. Usually the hands are almost the brightest thing, so I think that will be changed in the production versions. But Lume's readable. It's not bad. I do think it'll be better, so keep that in mind. Reluming and comparing to the Timex, you can see from the start they do have a similar color temperature, they have a similar brightness, so again, not too bad starting off with the Lume, and it's very legible. You can even read the seconds hand with that tiny bit of Lume in the end of the seconds pointer. So decent to start with. If they even add more in the production versions, it'll be even better. So yeah, I don't mind it. So starting off with the pros for this watch, and one of the biggest ones for me is just the fit and just the size in general. One, this is slightly under 40 millimeters, which is nice to see, and the way the case was constructed, the way the bracelet is constructed, and the thinness of that bracelet as well, it all just comes together on wrist as a really nice package. It feels good, it feels nice, the machining is done really well, so there aren't any really sharp angles. It just is a pleasure to wear. I do also think because that relatively blockier H styling from the case profile, even though this is 39 millimeters, I think if you're used to 40 and above, it won't feel too small on you. It still has a good presence on wrist, and thankfully, because it's still short lug to lug, it fits on those of us with smaller wrists. Another big pro for me is the finishing on this watch, and especially the finishing on the bracelet. This is machined very well. The brushing is done very finely, it's done very uniformly. The way it's integrated between the case and the bracelet all looks super well done. I don't really have any complaints with how this watch is finished. The accents of polish are done really well, especially on elements like the bezel. It just does feel like a high quality watch. And especially, again, I think the bracelet's kind of one of those things that draw your eye in the most. The way it's kind of almost multifaceted towards the end of the link, the way it catches the light, even though it's a brushed surface, it's very Royal Oak-esque with the way it shines. So it is just a beauty to have on wrist. It has a lot of kind of flair and a lot of attention going towards it. Even though this is more of a sports watch in general and has more brushing than anything, it still does it to a point where it looks very premium and it really grabs your eye and draws you in. Another thing I really like about this watch, and these
two models that I really had in particular is the dial color and the overall texture to them. They obviously went with some more subdued colors, like they have a black, a silver, and a blue, I believe. But this green and orange really take it to another level. The saturation of the color is beautiful. It's not trying to go halfway with the color. It's going all the way. It's bright, but it's not overbearing in my opinion. It just has enough saturation to be fun, to stand out, but it has enough seriousness behind it. Even the orange is not crazy in a sense. It still has a classicness about it, like let's say a Doxa. It doesn't feel like it will be out of style 30 years from now. It does have a beautiful tone they went for. And I just also think they executed the texture really well, that line pattern that's supposed to look like teak floorboards. It's cool. It has actual depth to it. It's executed well. It adds another element other than just being a really cool color to the dial. They went for something a little bit more unique and they did it well. And just lastly, I do think this is a good value watch. It's coming in at just under 650 bucks. I mean, 649. And to me, you're getting an amazingly constructed bracelet, a really well-wearing case, a really good dial, and a fairly good movement. So there's really nothing bad about this watch unless you just don't like the aesthetic, but I think the aesthetic itself also is pretty versatile, pretty timeless, and there aren't a lot of other watches in this price point I think do it just as well. I mean, maybe you can go for something like Zelos, but I have my own qualms with most of those models. You can go for something like Trasco, which is very one-to-one. You can go for something like Laurier, but those are a little bit more vintage leaning, and maybe the material usage you don't like as much. It doesn't feel as modern. This brand and the models that they offer, I think, is a very good value for where they're at. So moving on to cons, and realistically, I don't have many with this watch. There isn't things that I think are glaringly obviously bad about it. One of the things I personally don't like is the fact that all the links are the same size. Now, I did get word from the owner of Tuseno that they will be offering a basically half link in the future. Why that wasn't offered in the original production run, I don't quite know, but it's nice to see that they're at least going back and saying, hey, to get the perfect fit, we're gonna offer these afterwards. So that is nice, but as it stands, as the model that you would buy, it's not perfect, right? Thankfully, I was actually able to get a really good fit, but it's one of those things where with the same size link on everything and a butterfly deployment that doesn't have any micro adjust built in, you're kind of gonna either fit perfectly, or it's gonna fit loose, it's gonna fit too tight. You kind of just have to live with it. So it may not be perfect for everybody, and it's just something you have to live with at the moment. Another con that's kind of related is I don't like the fact that they went for a butterfly clasp. Just not my favorite clasping system. I know it looks a little bit more clean. It feels very streamlined. It doesn't buckle up very thickly on wrist. But again, I just don't like the fact that you can't have micro adjust built in very easily. I don't like the fact that sometimes, depending on how it lays, it can just feel weird. It's not my preferred class system. I've tried every butterfly class on almost all these watches. I've tried the Royal Oak, I've tried the Nautilus, I've tried all these things, and I don't like them on all of them. And just a very slight design point that I'm not in love with is I don't like the completely flat bezel. I do like it in some ways, but to me it makes the watch feel even flatter than it is. I think just a little bit of domage in a sense to the bezel would go a long way. Maybe that's just not the aesthetic they're going for, but I think I might have preferred it. Again, not having them side by side, I'm assuming I would like a dome bezel. Maybe the flat actually looks better. But that's just a design aspect point that I wanted to bring up. And again, I'm nitpicking at this point because there's not a lot wrong with the watch. Final thoughts, and I think this watch is awesome. I do think the original Tuseno I looked at, the shell back, was a great model, so I don't think this is any different. They're doing some really good stuff. They're doing great construction. I like that the fact that they went with this orange and green colorway on top of the more standard, more subdued colorways, because you know, it's just awesome to add a little fun to the watch box, especially at this price point where not everything has to be super serious, or even if you want it as a serious watch, there's nothing wrong with color. I think the tones they went for, the texture, the build construction, everything feels premium. Everything feels realistically above its price point a little bit. And there's not much I can say bad about this watch. The only reason you wouldn't like it realistically is one, if the bracelet doesn't end up fitting you perfectly, or two, if you just don't like the design. And if you don't like the design, I can't help you much there, but I don't think it's one of those designs that are super polarizing. Probably gonna look good to most people, and probably find a way to complement what's already in your watch box for the most part. Something I really like is this has an elegance to it where it's kind of in a, it's almost like what a skin diver is to a regular dive watch. It brings like a little bit of elegance to a sports watch where it's not super sporty, it's not super dressy, but it's really in that nice in-between sweet spot, so it can be used for almost everything. Can be used with a suit, can be used at the beach. It just has a lot of versatility to it, and I like that because sometimes you don't want 50 different watches for 50 different purposes. This one watch can do it all, or it can do most things where maybe that's an area you're missing in your watch box or missing in your collection, or a check box you need to check off. I really look forward to seeing what this brand does in the future. I think so far, seeing the iterations they've done with that base case shape and that base finishing, the bracelet style, all that, there is a lot going for it. It's good quality, it's a good price, and I don't think there can be many missteps with that core design language that they have. So it's exciting to see what comes next. If you get one, let me know. If you get one and love it, let me know. If you get one and don't love it, let me know why. Let me know if I'm wrong, if I'm right, whatever down in the comments below. Anyway, thank you as always for watching. Hope you got something out of the video, and I'll see you in another one.